Welcome to Mending Threads. This is your safe place and your stronghold for whole body wellness. This is a transformation series, mind, body, spirit, to look at issues that shape who we are, our personalities, our mental health, and our whole body wellness. So today we have as a topic cultural changes, looking at laws and attitudes and how this relates to some of the decisions that we make and the actions that we see. And today we have as our guest Dr. Oswald Walker. And so I'm sure that he will be on shortly. Dr. Walker, good morning. Good morning. We're morning, but it's going to be evening when people see good evening.
How are you doing? How you doing?
Just great, just great. I'm so glad you could be with us this morning and share some of your topics because you're such a great resource. And in within the Houston community, and not just the Houston community, as a pastor, educator, and author, researcher, and I think editor, okay, of magazine, I mean of newspaper. So sometimes you don't say everything, and I'm sure I haven't said all things. So I wanted to just say welcome, and I wanted to just casually kind of discuss some things. And I know next week we'll bring on more of the psychological proponent of this topic. But I wanted to know first, how did you really get into the whole aspect of history and culture?
Um, just always loved history. My parents challenged me to um, to delve into history myself. I've probably told the story before. Seventh grade in Texas, you're required to take Texas history. So I was in middle school taking Texas history and ran home after one just really exciting uh, class, exciting lecture, and just couldn't wait to tell my parents what I learned about the Alamo and all the incredible heroes and how they did this, that, and the other. And then they all died, and it was just such a tragedy because they stood for righteousness and they stood for independence and they stood for Texas. And I'm telling all this to my dad, and he said, "Wait a minute, you told me everyone died?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "So who told you that story? Like who told this story?" Um, and I just stood there dumbfounded. And he said, and he told me that no matter who is telling you something, always do your own research, always do your own reading, always do your own
Yeah.
thinking. And
Mhm.
so it was from that moment on when I realized that there was so much that we weren't being taught, and that I had to go find it myself if I wanted to know. And so that really put me on that journey to do my own reading, my own research, and yeah.
And that is something that now that's something that we have to hold on to, because when I read, they were saying you have to research both ends of whatever is going on to just not take what is actually said to you. You see,
Hmm.
people have different perspectives on things.
Right.
Hmm. So then, as I was thinking about us this morning or today, I was looking at, I said, different people have different ways of looking at culture, talking about culture and the effects of culture. So when you talk about culture, what do you have in mind or want us to have in mind when we talk about culture and any kind of changes? What do you want us to think about? Mhm.
Dr. Maulana Karinga says he described culture as like a people's, what does he call it? Like a people's passport, um, or like it's a people's currency, international currency, the way people look at and understand a certain group. Um, Culture is one of those words that I find kind of hard to define because it talks about so much. It's
Yes.
what do people what do people eat, the way they dress, dance, talk, interact, communicate, those things that are critically important to them, politically, religiously, socially, and otherwise. And so, I mean, you're talking music, you're talking habits, you're talking um, ways of being in relationship. You know, like there's in some Asian cultures, um, the way one individual speaks to another almost sounds like they're arguing because the communication is loud and uh, heightened. Well, you know, from my perspective, loud, heightened, and almost in your face. But that's a cultural thing. That's the way people communicate. They're not being angry. That's just a cultural thing. Um, and so that's how I look at culture. It kind of guides us in terms of how we connect with ourselves, with each other, and really with spirit. It's all those things, and I don't even know if that's a good answer to your question.
Well, no, that's a good answer. That's and going there, I'm sure. You know, you mentioned something. So there's a people in even within a community,
Hmm.
have different cultures, like can live in a small community. And I can remember we had a game of catch something, jousting or catch 22 or something like that. And so it was how quick you could think to have a comeback to what somebody was saying. And at one period in time, it was just the fun of doing it. So you weren't arguing. You were just trying to you were just quickly coming back to say, I got you, or something like that. So when I moved to the East Coast, and we were talking. So we had this little thing, and they were like, "Why are you saying that?" Like what? I was like, "Aren't we supposed to do that? Isn't that fun?" And they were like, "No."
Mm.
So it was the culture of the region
Yeah, yeah,
that was a difference that they saw. That when you mentioned, I thought about that they saw that as adversarial. You see, in that way. Hmm.
yeah. There's some definite regional things. Like I remember when our family moved to Louisiana. Uh, uh, Someone at my dad's job invited us to a crawfish boil. I had never been to a crawfish. I didn't know what. I had never seen a crawfish, and then we're there, and we're outside, and it's like the park bench tables, and someone takes this huge pot. And I see them pour all these
Yes.
little red
Thing.
critters onto the table, and there's potatoes and there's corn, and I'm like, what in the heck? What is going on here? But that was like foundational to the culture of Louisiana, where we were.
Right. And in terms of my culture, speaking of those things, we used to go to the pond and play with them. So when they were talking about, we would put little pieces of meat down and then play with them.
Mm,
And so it was no way in the world I was going to eat something like that.
yeah,
And so they call them mud bugs. I was not going to eat them, but it's
yeah,
just
man. I'm still not with
I'm
crawfish.
not with it. I'm not with it, but it's in the mind. It's in the mind. So you were talking about this, and this topic of culture is becoming wide. It's taking a different shape. People are beginning to pay attention to it and give respect to it in terms of finance, in terms of a lot of things. But I wanted to see, because you're teaching the history, and I
Hmm.
wanted to see if you were talking about and teaching your students, what are you teaching them, or what could you say about history and culture? What are some of the things that people really need to know now about history and culture?
Well, one thing that we go over in my classes is how there's so much of what we now consider Black or African American culture that survived uh, the Middle Passage. So much that is foundational to how we interact as Black folk um, can be traced back to how we interacted before we were enslaved. So, um, and, and I think that's important because so many people take the position that everything about us was destroyed during enslavement, during that whole process, those hundreds of years. But just think about this, um, our need for community from the African perspective, community was darn near everything. Community, connection, relationships. And so you see that playing itself out in Black life in America since then in a million different ways, through family reunions, through block parties, through the fellowship that we have at church, because church is not just about church, it's about the fellowship, in the vestibule before church, during and after. All
Mhm.
those things just kind of underscore our need for community, also our need for ritual. um, Malidoma Somé, the famous teacher, um, he wrote a book entitled Ritual, The Healing Power of Ritual. And in his other book of Water and the Spirit, both of those books talk about how rituals are so important to the psyche, the
Mhm.
emotional well-being of Black people. He describes rituals. He says rituals allow us to slow down in the midst of chaos. He says life gets busy for anybody. You got bills to pay, you got this, you got drama, you got this going on. And life gets so busy that we can forget that we were created um, by a power greater than ourselves. We can
Yes.
forget that our relationships with one another are more important than whatever drama that we might be going through. And so because life just gets busy and because you can hold on to stuff and not deal with stuff, African people instituted regular rituals. Some of those rituals would be communal, everybody would come together. Other rituals were personal and individual rituals that you would do to check yourself, to slow down long enough to remember, hey, man, I'm here for a divine purpose. Um,
Mhm.
and in some of those communal rituals, they were really about almost like laying your burdens down, um, dropping whatever beef you had with your neighbor, your sister, your brother, whoever.
Mhm.
Um, but those rituals, the need for that, we see that in the Black community. Black folk love us some baptisms, weddings. Hell, we even love funerals. All
Mhm.
those are rituals.
Mhm.
The act of regularly going to a worship service or some type of worship experience, that's a ritual. And then there are other things that we do personally, like some people meditate or they have quiet time in the morning or in the evening. Some people, it's almost religious. They have to go do a morning walk around the park or around their neighborhood.
Mhm.
Those are rituals. We don't even realize why we're doing it, but we're doing it to calm ourselves, to quiet, to reconnect to a power greater than ourselves. Um, the veneration of ancestors is a part of our culture. Um, and there's some others, but the point the point I make to my students is that so much of that Africanness is still there, and it's
Mhm.
foundational to, and you can see it playing out in our culture now.
So there's one that I was speaking to a group yesterday, and they were saying, "How is it that our families would maintain contact? They were able to go to work, have a family, keep contact with relatives, know who was doing what. What is it that they did that we didn't do?" And what you're saying is they had rituals that allowed them to maintain this contact and to show their interest and care. There was one, like, after church, people would visit each other or call
Hmm.
their family members. That was a day after service, and you had your meal. You would call all your family members, see how they were doing, and or you would drop by and have dinner with them or something like that. And so I look at all of the connecting kind of rituals during the week. On Saturdays, of course, I don't play cards all the time, everybody, but there were times that people used to play spades or what's this other card game?
Spades or Tonk or
Talk or the other one. There's another game, but anyway,
Gin.
gin or different things like that. But there's one that African Americans really like to play. We do, but it's not so much that, it is that there was a connecting around how we were going to do it, calling. So right now, what you're speaking about is we all have different ways or rituals. So we might want to begin looking, as you're speaking, I'm thinking about that, is that we would just call each other. The ritual was that you would call each other and say, bring something and come over. It was the spontaneity of gathering and the expectation that you would bring your heart, yourself, your caring, and you sort of know what your specialty was. And then you would come and everybody would have this wonderful activity and talk about everything that they had done that week.
That
Hmm.
reminds me of another one of those cultural things that I talked to my class about, the need for dynamic worship. Like when we worship, when we gather together, it is foreign to us to sit there and merely allow someone else to read scripture or to talk to us. Worship is dynamic, everybody is involved. And in those rituals, you just said everyone brings a piece of themselves or the best piece of themselves. In those
Mhm.
rituals, everyone had a role. The dancers had a role, the drummers had a role,
Yes.
the healers had a role. Everyone had a role to play, and another layer to that, uh, how that ritual, that need for dynamic worship plays itself out, not just on Sunday mornings or whatever day you consider the Sabbath. Um, the founder, the father of Black liberation theology, Reverend Albert B. Cleage, would argue that part of that ritual was what Black folk did on Friday and Saturday night too.
Hmm.
That release, that going somewhere and just letting go. I've been working, they've been treating me any kind of way. I need a release. I need to go see some of my people, some of my friends or whatever. We're gonna go to this club or go here, there, some house party. But I need that type of communal release so I can
Hmm. Hmm.
recenter myself. He said that was as much a part of the spiritual ritual as church was on Sunday morning.
Started like readiness, started like getting,
Mm-hmm.
it was a
Mm-hmm.
readiness kind of thing. So that was good. Hmm. So what would be then? So that's like one of the positive things. But what could be? I start looking at, like, speaking of culture, we're
Mm-hmm.
in a society now. We have telephones are bringing us closer together. Zoom, we're on Zoom, and we're in the workplace with so many different cultural groups. We're learning so much about other people and a little bit about ourselves. So I started thinking, what what then are some of the positive things that we could hold on to, or what do we need to look at in terms of culture, the upside and the downside of culture? You see, because we got the workplace, there's some things that are going on that are not spoken, but it's happening. Hmm.
Well, culture is not static. It can change, um, and that's really why Dr. Maulana Karinga founded Kwanzaa, I believe, in 1966, um, because from his perspective, he was looking at the way Black people were interacting, and he said, "We have created a new cultural norms that are not uh, healthy for our well-being." And so he believed we need to take the best of our values or um, historic cultural norms and focus on those, celebrate those, and incorporate those into our life. He chose seven, the Nguzo Sabah, or seven principles: um, unity, self determination, faith, creativity, cooperative economics. Uh, I'm not going to mention all seven,
Yes.
but the point was, he said, looking at our history, those were the 7 things that stood out to him. And he said, those are the things that we did. They were foundational to our culture, and they allowed us to thrive, to build the pyramids in ancient Kemet, to create the economic and educational centers of the world in ancient Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. Um, it's those cultural aspects. Unity, critical. Self-determination, not
Mhm.
waiting on someone else to do for you what the creator gave you the ability to do for yourself. Cooperative economics, um, uh, uh, faith, creativity, bringing all these things to the table. um, if we can reconnect with those, we can move out of these negative patterns that are creating a different kind of culture, and then recreate the positive culture that we need. Another person, if you don't mind me saying this as well, um, I mentioned him earlier, the father of Black liberation theology, Reverend Albert B. Clegg. He
Mhm.
argued that Black people in America, or really Black people around the world, exist in a slave culture. Because of enslavement, there were certain beliefs and behaviors that we were conditioned to accept and view as normal. But these beliefs and behavior patterns only keep us enslaved, allow us to accept second class citizenship. We were uh, we were operantly conditioned during enslavement to work against our best interests and to give more respect and time to the building of someone else's nation, someone else's businesses, and someone else's communities rather than our own. And so Klieg argues, if we are going to be what God called us to be, we have got to break free from this slave culture and create a counter culture, one that affirms who we are as Black folk, one that says we've got to be self determining. We can't give all of the best of ourselves to massa or to the boss on the 9 to 5, and then give our own families and communities just what's left over. We'll always be um, uh, chasing the dog's tail, so to speak.
Does he talk about how, from a cultural competent perspective or awareness perspective, how that would how that would be accomplished in face of opposition, in face of um, economically interfacing or needing to survive on a different financial system and not your own?
Well, what he argues is power resides in institutions. It's not in
Mhm.
individual people, the
Mhm.
title that you have, or the amount of money that you have in your bank account, but rather in institutions. So if we're going to be self-determining and be able to create the entire positive matrix that we need to operate our own culture, our counterculture, we've got to have institutions that look out for our interests. Um, food producing institutions. Like if you
Yes.
don't own those institutions, then you have another group that can either let you in the door to get the food, or they can make a decision to not let you in the door to get the food. Financial
Mhm.
institutions. If you're starting a business, most folks start by going to banks. Well, we know that Black and brown folk, uh, they get bank loans at far less a clip than other people. And
Mhm.
so, but if you have um, those financial institutions that you control, then you can fund these young people or not so young folk who have these brilliant ideas to start a business
Mhm.
or to,
Mhm.
do whatever it is they're trying to do. But he argues that power resides in institutions. But the process, he would argue, is we've got to look at 3 things: our lifestyle, our value system, and our time ritual. How are
Yeah.
we spending our time? Um, what are the things we're doing? We're lifestyle, the things that we're giving all of our energy to, and what are the values that are pushing us? Is it a value of individualism or a value of communalism, connection, cooperation? Is it a value of um, me, myself, and I? I can justify anything in my mind um, in order to get what I want. I can step on you, I can mistreat you, I can
Mhm.
disrespect you, um, and I can justify that because all I care about is what I get at the end of the day. Is that the value that is driving your bus, or is there another value system that says, wait a minute, I've got to live with that person, I've got to interact with that person, I can't treat them any kind of way. I have to see the God in them like I see the God in myself, and then treat them accordingly. So, uh, Klieg argued that those three things, that's how
Mhm.
we have to examine those and then make whatever changes necessary. But he believed that those changes could only come if we were working together, connected with other like-minded sisters and brothers.
Hmm. And so I think that while you were talking, when you're talking, I'm thinking of all those things. So what I'm saying is, I spoke with a young lady who's a teacher, and she was talking on yesterday about having to go and sit in these classes, and they were just going all day, blah 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 blah, and talking, talking, talking. And she says, half of the things that they were talking about went out the window. And I
Mm.
said, well, good for you, because now you know how all the little children that you're teaching feel all day long when you're talking about something that's blah, 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 and you don't feel a connection to it. There's no action to it. You're sitting there, and I have young people that tell me that their little buttocks feel numb and how they go from side to side in the chair. They're just sitting there, and they don't halfway understand the person that's speaking because their voices are too light or something. These are the things that I've made note of as to what could help, would be how we speak, the depth of the voice for some children. And so the thing about it, what I'm saying is that the educational institution, our training of our teachers, our training of these leaders to um, institute what you're speaking about, to bring about this change, and not only the wealth of the institutions or whatever, really starts with training our young people to understand what this all means. Not only the content of it, but how to accept the information to do something about it, and to change the teaching, the introduction of the information. You
And
see,
it's amazing. It's
mhm,
amazing how students of whatever age, how they open up to instruction, engagement, whatever, when they hear about themselves or someone that looks like themselves, when they see
mhm,
themselves in the lessons. That's why this whole attack on what folk are calling critical race theory is really such a crime, because it's really just saying that it's really folk who believe in the myth of white supremacy saying we don't want to talk about anything from any perspective other than the white nationalist, um, pro supposedly pro-American uh, position. And so anything that challenges all the fairy tales that we were taught about, uh, like George Washington could never tell a lie, or that um, he got his false teeth from a dentist who uh, built them from a tree, but in actuality, those were teeth that were extracted from some of George Washington's enslaved Africans,
yeah,
um, or that the founding fathers were all about liberty and justice for all, and we don't tell the story about how so many of them, in fact, most of them, um, were the biggest uh, owners of the enslaved in the entire country. Or we tell the fairy tale about the founding of America. Was all about um, folk uh, trying to stand against the tyranny of Britain, and how they were taxation without representation. When what the folk in the colonies were really objecting to was Britain saying we're going to get out of the slavery business, and folk in the colonies were like, that's getting us too much money. We can't stand for that. And so that was the break. That was the driving force. And so in this country, like Nicole Hannah Jones has shown in the 1619 Project, everything, everything in this country has been about race. And so for
Mm-hmm.
these folk to attack critical race theory, they're saying they don't want to acknowledge that. They want to hold on to the fairy tales, and will literally punish those who seek to speak truth, or come from uh, a
Mm-hmm.
pan a perspective that's outside of the very narrow white centered perspective.
And
I
I
hope that
think
makes sense.
I think you're right on. I think that holding on to that topic that you have, that this whole idea is to punish persons who think outside of that perspective and who even teach a holistic or a circular way, or let me say it, a community oriented way. Those persons are not, and I'm beginning to understand it even more. Those persons are not, do not receive the rewards, so to speak, whether they're on the job. Those are not going to be the ones who, because if that would happen, then you would then actually move that particular group culturally in a different place, to
It's
a different,
all
you see. Mm-hmm.
it's all operant conditioning. Um,
Mm-hmm.
those who seek to control you will reward you for behavior that they want, and they will punish you for behavior that they don't. And when you see that happening over and over and over again for days, weeks, months, years, generations, um, there is something consciously or subconsciously that lets you know how you are supposed to act. Oh, I am supposed to um, shuffle my feet and, you know, pay deference and homage to 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 white people, ideas, ideologies, and ways of living, and I'm supposed to turn my back on um, African or Latino ways of thinking, ways of eating, ways of being, ways of spending time, because that's not what is honored in this society. In fact, it's oftentimes punished. And you talked about punished in the classroom, punished on the job, punished
Mm-hmm.
socially, for standing up and speaking out. And there's a million examples of that, right? Where people stood up and said, you know, I'm not going to take it anymore. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. Um, and so I'm going to stand up because the way things are operating are not conducive to my well-being. So I have to speak up. But those folk have been socially and politically, economically punished for taking their stand, but they continue to stand every generation. There are others who take that stance because it's something inside of them so strong. It is that small, still voice, I believe, of God that is calling them to fight back against anyone who would dare try to reduce them to something less than what God created them to be. I don't want to start preaching now, but
Well, no, we go right on.
you almost got me started.
That's all right. Well, you're going right because you're moving, you're talking about it. And I think we have to start, I think just not, we're not, so I think you have to understand it and people have to hear it in terms of knowledge in order to know what to do about it, what action must be taken. But the other thing is that as you were speaking of conditioning, so then, we talked about Black Wall Street, before. We talked about different things, and I saw in Wilmington, Carolina, what I was wanting to say is that all of the insurrection in Washington D.C., etc., that generally those behaviors.
Dr. Lewis, I have to stop you. My wife just came out the bedroom and she's just looking so beautiful. I just have to say that. Oh my God. I'm about to pull it on camera, but she's not
Or
going to let
pull
me
up,
do
let
that.
me see. Let's take a look.
Let me
I
see if I
hope
can.
it was
See,
beautiful this morning.
she's not going to do it.
Well, she won't do that.
She won't
Okay.
do it.
Well, maybe we can, when we get off camera, we can find out what that is, because that
Okay.
would be. So now, see, you right on into culture now. So what you saw is beautiful. may not be right, may not be seen as beautiful, but it captured your attention.
Right.
But I was going to say, speaking of conditioning, it may be that she's getting ready to prepare breakfast. And and it may be the connection of her face with the breakfast. So, but anyway, but so what I wanted to say, moving, is that persons in that time they were actually rewarding or not rewarding. What they would do is burn the place down. They would
Yeah.
actually destroy the character of the individuals. They had I was reading something and it had a stepwise cultural speaking, and they would have platforms politically stating to help rebuild America, to regain. And I said, wow, that's where this came. So it was looking at during that period of time, Waddell or something was the name of the leader, of the person, I believe. And they were talking about how the three-step process that they would use during Reconstruction to destroy anyone that would support the cultural change for African Americans in leadership. And so, and this is what's going on when we spoke of persons in the area. And it was saying that until we began to appreciate the differences and appreciate that this and accept this, that we will repeat these cycles over and over, and we'll be able to see it during the presidencies
Yeah.
because elections reflect exactly the attitudes, the opposite of the attitudes. To
People
keep,
often
mhm.
people often talk about Willie Lynch and the Willie Lynch letters and all that. And there have been people that said, well, that's Willie Lynch wasn't a real person, etc. But the moral of the story is real. And if you want to get to the real, read Kenneth Stamp's book, The Peculiar Institution, or more specifically, chapter 4 of that book. Chapter 4 is entitled To Make Them Stand in Fear. He lays out the process for controlling human beings or reducing them to uh, beings that would better accept enslavement. He literally goes step by step. You do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. And everything that he laid out in that process, you can literally see being enacted over the generations. I mean, long after
Mhm,
enslavement,
mhm,
companies, governments still do those very same things, seeking to control different populations. And what's crazy is they're not just trying to control black folk, um, but Latinos, poor whites. In fact, a lot of researchers have argued um, that poor whites have to be the dumbest voting bloc on the planet because historically they continue to allow this this hyper wealthy 1% to control them with divide and conquer tactics by blaming all of their issues and problems on black people or brown people or homosexuals or women or people who respect science.
mhm,
Um, and so then they get all up in this frenzy and vote against their own best interests. Now, on the flip
mhm,
side of that, there's been research that says they're really not voting against their own best interests, even though they are voting against their own economic interests or access to healthcare interests. What this new research finds is so many of this huge voting bloc, they rather see pain come to black and brown people than they would accept less
yes.
knowing that black and brown people are being hurt. Like if there's a policy that would help these middle class poor whites out, um, and you would think that they're going to vote for that policy, they look at it and they say, or they're being told by, the folk that they listen to, that they're being conditioned by, um, that policy is going to give Black and brown people an advantage, um, then they say, even though it's going to hurt me, I'm going to vote against that because I don't want to see that group over there, those black and brown folks, get anything. And so, even though from our perspective, hey, they're voting against their own best interest, they're not even allowing themselves to get access to health care or this advantage or that
Mhm.
advantage. But in so many of their minds, they would rather take the loss, take the L,
Yes,
than
yes.
see anything um, advantage folk who are outside of their group. I may be going way off the.
No, no, you're right in there. There was this lady, God, if I could, Favina Rodriguez. And I'm gonna read her magazine. Someone told me to read it. It's called Strike Magazine.
Mhm.
And what she said was the same thing that you're saying. She said, if we ever recognize that what we would have to do is to look at these three areas, she said, pay attention to racial discord, not only looking at finances, but look at women's issues, women's and voting issues. And then the third area was climate change. Those
Hmm.
those three things, she says, people think are different, but they're all related. You see, and
What's her name again?
her name is Rodriguez. I think it's Favina or something. But I'm gonna reach out to her. I'm gonna find her because she thinks critically. In other words, she steps back and she's looking at how to get well.
Hmm.
See, so how to get well is not to look at the little things that are going on, but to step back and look at how the things are connected. Because you made a point there, you see, is that she said, you must divide the people. You must get the people who want to do the same thing to think that one must get there before the other one.
That's the whole. That's foundational to Bacon's Rebellion when you had the enslaved black people in this country and dirt poor white people who were um, economically no better off. They worked together and they literally took up arms against the wealthy class, and they fought them to a standstill. And then the wealthy class said, "Well, wait a minute. Let's pull out the old divide and conquer. We'll give these dirt poor white folks something that will at least make them think they are moving forward,
Yes, yes,
and they will break their allegiance with this group." Um, and so what they gave them was the gift of whiteness. You know, in this country, um, uh, basically what they told them was, your whiteness is valued. You are better. The lowest, most ignorant white person is better than the most brilliant, accomplished black person. So no matter what your economic status, you always have something that gives your life meaning and value that you can hold on to. And we see that playing out to this very day. Um, one 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 of my mentors said, uh, you have some dirt poor white person with three teeth in their mouth living in a trailer park actually believing that they are superior to someone like Michelle Obama or W.B. Du Bois or Marcus Mosiah Garvey simply because of the gift that they were given as a result of Bacon's Rebellion, the gift of quote unquote whiteness. Or really, it's the gift of a superiority complex that allows you to believe that you are better. But you were saying how something you said made me think of Nicole Hannah Jones from the 1619 Project, uh, because she was willing to speak from a critical, she do critical thinking and think from a perspective outside of the box. She was punished in terms of her job choices. You know, she was supposed to be up for tenure at her alma mater, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and the people on the board him and hawed, and they first said no when she was the most worthy candidate that they had in the whole school. But she
Mhm.
was being punished for
Yes,
her views in the 1619 project,
yes, yes.
views that got her a Pulitzer Prize, by the way. But she was
Mhm.
being punished, and they thought they were getting over on her. Um, but she held her ground and said, "No, you're going to respect what I bring to the table." And they finally caved in. And then she told them, "Peace, y'all. Forget you. I'm going to Howard." Um, but we continue to. It's still it's still in action today where I mean, Dr. Willie Mae Lewis, I read about you in a great article in the Defender newspaper and online at defendernetwork.com. And I read about all your great work. Um, Hell, why aren't you um, one of those people that are counseling presidents and that are counseling, global ambassadors? Um, because we're living in a society or a matrix that sees, oh, she's all about culture. She's all about bringing people together. She's all about all those things that that push back against the controls that we are trying
Mhm.
to place upon a people to allow them to just be happy in their enslavement.
Mhm. Well, one of the things that this young lady that I was telling you about, one thing that she said, Miss Rodriguez was saying that I like. She was saying nothing. That's my cat. Please, I forgot to close the door. Is he's just pushing back to get here to see what's on the screen. So what she said that we can do all that we want to do, but until persons within the community begin to see and understand that culture, the respect for culture must come before secure policy changes. See,
Mm, wow.
culture, that's right. It's so culture appreciation and understanding comes before sustained policy thing. And that is so true.
That's
So
powerful.
that's powerful. And so you see the role that we have, and I'm really praying every day to try to see how to do this. And I know that there are ways that we can get funding to help this project, but the persons who want to do that are not going to get it because it would be limited chances because you would actually be recreating a perception of what culture is and the appreciation of culture, you see.
Can you say that again? You said culture comes before. Can you remind
The
repeating that?
sustained policy before culture has to change first. The appreciation, whatever, has to come first before any sustained policy measures or changes come. And
So
people,
when
mhm,
you said that, my mind went directly to one of those uh, religious or spiritual nuggets that can be found in Christianity, Islam, Judaism, traditional African faiths. It was the words that were reportedly over the entranceway into the African mystery temples in ancient Egypt, ancient Kemet. Man, woman, know thyself.
know
It's
thyself.
like
Mhm.
um, no matter what the religious spiritual group denomination, that's step number one. If you don't know who you are, and you're really talking about your own history, your culture, your cultural grounding. I think you said in that Defender article, you talked about a person's synchronicity, their center, their foundation. If you don't
Mhm.
know that, you've already lost.
You don't
You've
know. You
already lost.
right, right.
But
One thing.
if you have that,
Mhm.
all things are possible.
The people that I work with, the ones that are able to sustain, they have that idea that I no matter what, that I will be able to do. I may lose, I may be on the street, may not have my house, I may not have my car, but I'll have me and I'll
Hmm.
be okay with me. You understand? And so
Hmm.
then you can really work with them because they're already over halfway. You
Hmm. Right.
understand? But the person who's really have no idea, you have to start there. And that's why I'm gonna appreciate these classes that you're doing. And I hope that people can see this is whether this is not to be taken lightly, these classes, these classes I'm getting ready to start publish to really get them out in the newspaper. I'm gonna try to get them on TV and different places. This will be the first time that not only just the classes will be taught, but this will interface with different levels of the community, youth and adults, in terms of parenting, in terms of all that, but really begin to look at mental health as it is related to knowing our culture. I did one thing with Malefi Asante that I was really pleased about, and he allowed me to work with him to develop a class
Mm,
that
wow.
looked at mental health and the knowledge of oneself in Africa, coming from where you are from. And I'm sure we'll be able to, as we get more cultures from other places, to come forth with theirs. So it is that premise that the more you know, the stronger your mental health, but also the way that you read something, interpret something, enters your spiritual self. And even so, we'll get into that next week. But the thing is, you brought on the Bible and the spiritual, no matter what force, spiritual or religious or whatever's for, that theme, that understanding is truly there. And I know you're going to bring it forth to the community in those classes. And I'm really encouraging everybody to go to our website and start signing up. And we're getting ready to start publicizing it this week and trying to get things out to the radio stations and TV stations and things like that. The first of its kind. And they're going to do video trailers, and they're getting ready to do that, and hope that we can get enough people signed up for that very first class. This is awesome in terms of the mental health coaching. See, because now you're going to have a well-rounded group of people that can help train police officers, train teachers. They can share, not train, but share information during their training to reshape an attitude of health and wellness and who they are. So this is truly what the young lady Rodriguez is talking about. This is that step that we're getting ready to make. And I know that there's going to be misunderstandings, resistance, and whatever, but God is leading me to know really is that this is what our community needs. And now I got to get my community to hear that this is what we all need to come together, no matter what our specialties are, to really see this is in.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. You disappeared, doctor, but I'm going to say this, I guess, before we cut off. This is August, Marcus Garvey month, and he said that, I'm paraphrasing, the person that knows themselves can do anything, but the person that doesn't believe in themselves, they are twice defeated in the game of life. Knowing self, recognizing that is just so critically important. And since we've lost our host, I guess I'll just close us out and invite everyone to check out Mending Threads each and every week, each and every Tuesday. You can see it live on Tuesday mornings at 7 a.m. Central, but you could also see it, I believe, Houston Public Media, 7 p.m. The rebroadcast, 7 p.m. Central on the Houston Public Media channel. And we're going to hope that, well, we know Dr. Lewis is okay. It was probably her cat that just ran across her laptop and got her cut off. But again, check out Mending Threads next week. All right, you all take care.